Hi, this is Alaska Reid, and you're listening to Songminer. Today's guest is Delwater Gap, also known, but less popularly so, as Holden Jaffe. Holden just released a record called I Miss You Already and I Haven't Left Yet, and we actually speak about the last song on that record, which is also my favorite, so I'm so happy he decided to do that one, which is called We Will Never Be Like Anybody Else. He also has a new single out called Cigarettes and Wine, so anybody that has not heard his music before should check it out. He's an awesome songwriter, and yeah, I think this is one of my favorite conversations I've done so far for Songminer, just because I think you as listeners will be able to hear it, but Holden and I just have a really emotional connection because he was the first person to ask me to do a more comprehensive tour across the US with him. And it was also his first time doing that. And so it felt very intense and very special. And I think we learned a lot on the road. And it was just kind of one of those things in my life that I'm always going to remember. So I'm very happy that he took me on the road for that. So I think you'll enjoy this discussion because we aren't as literal all the time in it, and we kind of go deep and we, explore lots of things. So please enjoy this conversation with Holden from Delwater Gap. I also want to announce that I have a new editor on the podcast, which is saving my life and also just making me so joyous, because if any of you guys had seen the files for this, it was really scary before. So I want to give a shout out to Zios, who is editing this episode. So please enjoy. Thank you all for listening. And here's my discussion with Holden, aka Delwater Gap.
Hi, Alaska.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I was going to ask if you, to start things out, if you wanted to give a little musical history about Delwater Gap.
Yeah, I'd love to. I grew up in a really small town and I was bad at sports and I was really quiet. And so when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time sort of sitting in the woods by myself and looking up at the sky, which is something that I've later come to really appreciate. I think maybe you grew up in a similar pace, but I had a lot of time to sit around and think, and I think naturally I came to writing out of boredom. And when I was finishing high school, I got my high school to allow me to turn a storage closet that they had into a little recording studio. They bought me some speakers and some mic stands, and I ended up building this little studio there. In a building at the school, and then I started recording. And so my senior year of high school, I made 6 songs that I ended up releasing on Bandcamp as Delwater Gap, and then moved to New York with no real intention of pursuing it as a life or as an art project, but started connecting with some writers and musicians and producers for the first time in New York, who mirrored back to me that Delwater Gap in this record was something that was worth pursuing. So yeah, I started playing shows, and it really just very, very slowly over the course of years turned into a life and turned into something more than just an artistic wandering.
Hmm.
That's really how it started, and then it's sort of shaken itself up and flipped over a few times here and there over the course of the years, but yeah, it is a life now, so I'm very grateful for that.
That's pretty cool. I'm just thinking of you as like a little kid sitting in some sort of forest and
Yeah.
writing. But also, in some way, I hope this doesn't come out harsh, but it's interesting that you say, like, you had to speak to some peers and
Yeah.
be like, have them say this is worth pursuing, because I don't know. Knowing you, I can see that, but it's so funny because it's just so evident for everyone else. Like it's just so clearly there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's really sweet of you. Yeah, and you know, it was honestly less about insecurity or a non-belief in Delwater Gap and more of just a great interest in other things. Like I really just wanted to be a producer and I really wanted to be an engineer. I loved microphones and signal flow and all that.
Yeah.
So I went to music school to do that and to learn how to do that. And you know, and I think some of it was also just what was some insecurity was being shy. You know, I just never really sung in front of people, and it's something that you know, I think is a bit of a dividing line in my world still between my artist friends, is that there are artists I know who came up who started as recording artists, and then artists who started as, you know, playing live and playing shows, and then, you know, came to writing and recording as a product of that. And I always considered myself someone who came up in the live space because I really learned how to play music in front of people in New York. But
Mm-hmm.
if I really think back to it, like I am someone that's my intro into music and making music was a very private, introverted, solitary experience, you know, of sitting by myself and obsessing and making something that I wasn't really sure anyone would ever hear, you know. So
Yeah, I think that's what I meant is it's hard to articulate, but it doesn't feel like insecurity. It just feels like you have a
mhm.
very private world within each of
Mm.
your songs, and that, you know, obviously you're kind of working in a pop sphere, and so that really requires opening up
Mhm.
that world. But it's an interesting way that you do that, because there is something about your songs, like, because I've been reading a lot of your lyrics and of course
Uh-huh.
looking back at one of my favorite songs, Alone Together, and the demo that
Oh,
you
thank
sent.
you.
But yeah, it's so private, it's so like special and kind of lonely in a cool way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying all that and for listening and for reading the lyrics. And I don't know, I guess that yeah, it's interesting word private, because it's a word that other people have brought up to me. Like, you know, you seem like a really private person. And I think that like my favorite songs, you know, I find this about your music and, you know, some of the artists that I mentioned earlier when we were talking, like I feel like there are certain songs that you can tell were written by one person alone. At least I feel like I can tell.
Hmm.
Like there's a different feeling or a different ownership. And I think that I feel like I've done something right when I can make something alone, make something really privately that still feels like it approaches people with open arms a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Like the idea of making music without the intention of being accessible, but sort of accidentally being accessible by the nature of being true.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's it.
like that's what I'm trying to say. I think that to me is a victory in my mind when that's able to happen, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have that image of you, and it clicks because it's like your connection to the source. You know, when I read your lyrics, I see this, but your connection to this source of inspiration, or this in between magical world that writing a song creates, or, you know, opens a portal to. It's like I can see you being like, it's really just me and that needed, and like, not that you don't want to share, but it's not necessarily the goal of your art to just, you know, share it in a way, or, you know, but in that way you are sharing it. I'm not being very good, but
No,
I
I
don't
hear
know.
what you're saying, and I think what I'm imagining as you're talking about it is there's a bit of a voyeuristic aspect, right? Of like, you're right, because and once again, like interested to hear your perspective on this, because I hear that same thing in your music that you're saying that you hear in mine, of this very, I can hear the sacred space that you write from, you know. You're such a great world builder, and I think that your music, knowing you, is such a product of your brain. You know, it's like some people make music and you're like, that's amazing, but that doesn't it's not maybe expected. And I think for you, in the best way, like I hear your music, I'm like, that just is Alaska, like your words and your art. And it makes so much sense to me in the best way. Like your art is very in line with your energetic presence, you know?
Yeah.
And I think once again, just to touch on what you're referring to, I think maybe I don't know. I used to live in New York City, and one of the things that I loved about living in New York was these little fleeting moments of staring out the window of my apartment and seeing all these other little windows
Mm,
across the
I
street from
love that
me,
about
and
New York.
getting glimpses of people's lives, like a flash of someone drying their hair, a couple fighting, like someone shaking out their curtains, and it all happens so obliviously, right? There's this great stage that everyone is put on in this urban landscape, and we're given these little pinholes into people's very intimate moments. And I think that to me is a version of a visualization I have about the notion of an audience perceiving my music or hearing my music. I wouldn't say that I'm someone that writes with an audience in mind. Like I definitely create with my back to the world as much as anyone else. But I think there is, to your point, I think there is a bit of a hope that someone will catch a glimpse of it, from across the street. Because I think really in a lot of cases in life and in art as artists, really what we want is a witness, right? In friendship and romantic relationships, we want someone to witness our experience, whether that's joy, whether that's pain. It is very validating to be seen and to be heard in whatever
Yeah.
experience that you're having. And I don't know, it's something I really appreciated on a different level. I just finished a long tour a few weeks ago, and that was one thing in particular that I really got a new appreciation for. And I talked quite a bit on stage about that, the gratitude around being witnessed, in euphoria or in pain or in sadness or in
Mm,
melancholy, how relieving that can be.
yeah. Yeah. I think I think part of the reason when I write what I'm writing for is I am writing for myself these memories because in a way I had said a lot for my last album, Big Bunny. I had said a lot like I am writing, or my last EP. I had said this is a diary, and it really was because it's a way of encapsulating these feelings in my life, and I never wanted those to be forgotten. And so
Mm,
not even that I don't even listen to my own music, but it's like something about me writing it down. I can look back and put myself in that moment of all the things that I love, or the pain, or the confusion, and I can preserve a part of my life like that. And
mm,
so it's very cool when people see that and they feel that and they say I understand by listening to the music, because I can read my favorite books 1,000 times and they can transport me, but you know maybe it's obsessive, or I'm self-obsessed in some way, but like I'm trying to do that with my life, be able to,
mm-hmm,
when I die, that those are little pieces that, people that I love can remember me by, maybe.
mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's not as concrete as that, but I guess
I hear
it's
what you're
just,
saying. Yeah, I
yeah,
hear what you're saying.
creating the world that you want within this real world. When
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it feels like our real world is so against those spaces. So I feel that in your music, and
No, thank you.
yeah, that's cool
No,
though.
yeah, yeah, and it's real quick. I hear what you're saying about wanting to, yeah, protect a certain memory, and I don't think it's self-obsessed or self-centered. I think it's a real way to honor your experience of life, and I think it's. I had a friend who always said that songs are they're a representation of a moment in time, and
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
really interesting practice to go on tour too. And I don't know if you felt any of that in all the touring that you've done, but revisiting songs years later on tour again and again, and how you're transported back in some ways as you perform those songs, and in some ways they come to take on new meanings.
Yeah, definitely. They're like security blankets. Like I have certain songs in my set that I'm like, if I play this, I'm gonna put us back on course, or I'm
Yeah,
gonna get my head straight, you know, because this is the root, this is the essence of who I am, and this story
totally,
is like my safety. It's my safe space.
totally.
Yeah, also just to be able to look back at your life and be like, even if I'm writing characters, be like, oh, I hopefully did a good job living it. Like I got to live little bits of magic in my life. And you
Yeah.
infuse that with your songs. But thinking about windows and looking into people's windows and that kind of urban landscape, do you feel like your album is a New York album?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it is a New York album. I don't think I knew it was when I was writing it, but I learned how to be an artist and I learned how to be an adult in New York. I really built my identity within that city and around that city. And I had never met other artists before I moved to New York. And I think so much of our artistic development is about seeing ourselves mirrored back at ourselves off of other people. When someone being in a community can teach you a lot about who you are as an artist. And so I think in a lot of ways, this album was about like the end of a certain era of my artistry and my humanity and the beginning of a new era. You know, I guess one of taking less pleasure in self-loathing or self-pity.
Hmm.
Um, and I think those feelings, you know, there's something about New York that I think a lot of people, I know that I had a bit of an abusive relationship with that city. You know, it's you live in compromising situations and you're all on top of each other, and there's sort of an inherent anger, but it brings everyone together, and there's somewhat of a camaraderie in being against the city. Very paradoxical, but I think that some of that and those feelings ended up in the record. And then also just in writing for the first time pretty extensively about a few relationships I'd had that started and unfolded in New York. New York as the backdrop for you know a frenetic love affair. You know, it's there's something about it that is very conducive to romance in my mind. You know, this feeling of like getting off the plane in New York and just wanting to chain smoke and have a beer shot combo and get into something. You know, like I don't know.
That's
There's just such a lineage too, right? Of like New York art. It's
it's a mystery to me. I'd
yeah. Have you
really
spent time there?
a little bit, but not really. I really don't understand it fully. And that thing that you're talking about this kind of mutual anger, love, you know, about the city, I don't understand that, but I sense that it's there, and I really wish I could sometimes. I really wish I could feel cool in that way, because I feel like that's like the ultimate coolness, you
I
know?
think Montana cool is pretty fucking cool. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know, and
but
maybe I'm just romanticizing something I don't fully understand, but I think I have found your part of the country extremely romantic for very different reasons, you know.
yeah.
Do you feel like there is a deep connection between your art and Montana or LA? Like do you feel a resonance, you know, a location resonance in your music?
This is something I think about a lot because it stresses me out,
Uh-huh.
because also I think part of the reason I write songs is to feel like I have a place in both of those
Right.
places, because my life hasn't really had a full footprint in either, or
Right.
I've had a foot in both in this weird way.
Right.
I think my writing captures a sort of Western spirit, and I that's like such a cheesy way to say it, but the town and the area, as you know, in Montana that I'm from, it's had a lot of amazing writers live here that have written about the West in some way, but none of them have necessarily been from here. And so I think that is something that's inspiring for me. And I think I feel connected to that kind of, you're driving on the 15 North and there's like sunset, a beautiful sunset, and then there's trash all over the side of the highway. And it's like, that is my writing,
Yeah. Oh,
that,
man.
but I'm very fascinated with, and I think this is also something that enchants me about your work is I feel kind of this thing about it being, I feel the small town in you, and then I feel also the kind of urban metropolis vibes, and I don't understand it, and I wish I could, and so I guess the closest way that I can live through it is through art. But it's interesting because your song "We Will Never Be Like Anybody Else" feels, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily feel exactly like a city song, but it has some of that like Eastern US, I don't know, environment.
I'm lonely and I can hardly talk about it. There's a feeling in my chest, I can hardly talk about it. It's an angry out and out, I can only help me still. It's a memory, I can aim it, I can hardly talk about it. We're sleeping through the blackout, pissing in our feelings. Fuck it, I'm alone now, till I start believing we will never be like anybody else. There's a memory I can aim it, I know you aim it out. I can aim in the fairy, I can aim it in and out. I don't live, I don't live, I don't know, and I'm here. It's a memory, I can even talk about it. And I can find a new girl who looks right in photos, catching eyes on video, losing you in slow-mo. But we will never be like everybody else. See you in a white dress, catch your father pacing with a hand on my chest. It would be amazing, but we will never be like everybody else.
Let's talk about it. I want to hear your
I'd love
thoughts.
to. Yeah, I mean that song in my mind, the memories that I was writing about were New England memories,
Okay.
which I grew up in New England, in a small town, and the moments in which I left New York City to go reconnect with myself or reconnect with, a partner would happen in these pilgrimages out of New York into New England to sit and be in touch with nature and swim and slow down and lie on the floor and watch the sunlight and check in with myself. And that song came out of a memory about doing that, essentially, running and running and running and running for years, nonstop on tour, making records, just the absolute insanity and joy and pain of that life of touring, and the realization that so much avoidance can happen if you have a certain pace in your life. And I don't know if that's something that you've ever considered or thought about as someone who also has toured quite a bit the last few years, but I think real moments of necessary self-discovery or emotional auditing, perhaps, like, you're able to defer that when you're traveling all the time. Like, I find that so much of tour is about putting one foot in front of the other and just finding a meal and being able to get some sleep. And it's also not about, I never think about tour as really being about me. It's about the people that come to the shows, and it's also about just being a good leader within
Yeah.
my touring group, and like, trying to make sure that everyone feels taken care of. And as a result of that, I feel like so much of my internal work, or my work within relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, really would get deferred to these very specific windows, where there would just be a week or two of like, okay, now we're going to catch up on 6 months of really heavy, hard emotional work. And that song is a bit of an ode to that pace and that style of processing, and finally catching a moment with someone that you've had so much to say to, and you've been holding on to it because you haven't found the right time to say it, and finally you find a moment, and a lot comes out that you didn't think you needed to say, you didn't think you had in you, and then it's in the air. And then what do you do once you've said something and you've realized that you feel something, and you can't take it back, and just what that feels like, just to sort of see the color of like that space between two people change, and I guess like the sadness in that, and I guess the joy in that too. But I think that song in particular is about just like a deep, deep tragic sadness about realizing that the stories that you've told yourself about a relationship or a connection have not been a whole picture of the truth, which is just what we do as humans, right? We tell stories, and that
Yeah.
is such a part of how we find meaning in life, and how we get through the day, and how we connect with people, and how we formulate self-image. But yeah, I have found that there are these real moments of like immense clarity, and that song is just about a particular moment that I had of just like, oh, this is powerful, and I didn't know what this was, and now I know, and I know that it's maybe not as tied up in a bow as I always thought it was, and just trying to figure out what to do with that, sort of existential negotiation of that realization. Yeah.
Here's a fucked up question.
Yeah.
When you're in the deep shit of whatever that song is about, are you saying to yourself, I'm gonna write a song about it?
No, it's I used to do that, and then I stopped doing that, and I think me stopping doing that had a lot to do with feeling a bit uh artistically burned out from touring. Like I didn't feel like I took very good care of my artist on tour, my internal artist. But yeah, I mean, we absorb things that we don't even realize we're absorbing. So that song happened really accidentally. I didn't really know that I wanted or needed to say that, but it just happened. But more recently, I'm finally having some breathing room, and I'm actually having that feeling again of furiously writing things down as I hear them and think of them, I don't know if you ever saw the Dewey Cox story. You ever remember that movie, Walk Hard?
Oh my God, did I? I
It's
might
this great
have.
John C. Reilly movie that it's effectively like a parody of Walk the Line. It's great, but there's this recurring theme in that movie that I always really connected with, where him and his wife will be fighting and she'll say something and then he'll have like a light bulb moment and be like, "Oh my God." And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. Like, don't go write a fucking song right now, you know?"
Yeah.
But what about you? Do you feel yourself actively mining as you live and as you go through life and as you experience things?
I think I'm more separated from it than you are. I feel like I feel worried for you sometimes because I feel like you dangerously write these like fucking painful, soul bearing, heart tear out moments, and I avoid that, I think. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes I'm like, oh shit, like Holden's going there. But maybe you're just fooling me and you're doing an excellent job at creating characters that are so real, and you're inhabiting that role. Like that's actually something I want to talk to you about. That was one of my questions, is like how close to the truth is everything in your songwriting, and like do you try and blur things? Like is that important to you? Because it's really important to me, because being raised around writers, I always thought that the fiction element was really important because it's a protection measure, in a way.
Right, you're saying just to protect the people in your life.
No, it's worse than that. I just want to protect
You want to protect
myself.
yourself.
I just want to protect and those people are part of it,
I hear you. Yeah, yeah. I always thought about Delwater Gap, the art that I make via Delwater Gap, as truth with certain dials turned up and certain dials turned down. It's
Great.
all effectively true. I think a lot of the reason that I started a project using a project name rather than my name was the idea of being able to play with truth and identity and personal history in a way that I feel like I wouldn't have been able to if I had just used my name. I think I was right. I made that decision a long time ago, but I think it was, for me personally, the right decision, because I get to suit up into Delwater Gap. It's definitely me. It's not a character. It's not a many years long performance piece by any means, but there is a moment when I feel myself click in to that version of myself that allows me to, yeah, pull strings in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it before, but I just think storytelling is such an inherent part of being a human. And I always really struggled with metaphor. And I think, to allude to something that you said earlier about my music feeling, whatever the word that you used, something about bearing my soul, and maybe your music to you feeling like a slightly bit more like arm's length. Like, I think that the only difference, at least in my understanding as a fan of your music, is the use of metaphor, which is something that I really admire about your music. I think that you're able to infer a lot more, um, and infer things in a very visual, poetic way, where I think that just by the nature of how I became a writer, which was reading certain authors whose voices are very colloquial, I think that naturally my music and my writing voice was always one that was very colloquial. And I really struggled with finding a way to not simply write lyrics that would be could be taken out of the context of a song and just spoken to someone and they would feel like a normal thing to say to someone. So I guess what I'm saying is that I always thought of that sort of colloquial nature as a bit of a limitation, but I think one of the important parts of artistic maturation is realizing your limitations and playing to them and saying, like, this is just what I do, and this is just what I what I have to work with, and that is what makes me who I am. But yeah, I just, with regard to character writing too, I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who are able to just build believable characters, you know, in their music and in their art. I think it's such a talent because it takes a real understanding of people. You know, I think you have to be an observer to be able to build a believable character, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we do it similarly in a way. I mean, everything comes from a truth, and I blend it with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I never am writing necessarily about, for the most part, people who are mega close. I think that's more what I'm saying is like, I feel that you are often writing songs about that, you know, nuclear person in some time of your life that's the closest person to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so brave, and that's something I don't do because I'm fearful. I don't know. And you write your songs with such I fall in love with whoever you are talking about in your song.
Oh,
like
man, that is
you so
such a sweet thing to say. Yeah.
you know what I mean? And I think that's like
Yeah.
I think one of your strongest talents is in that way. You're so loving, even when there's conflict. Like, you're so loving to that person that you're writing about. And I guess that ties into that thing about you saying that you're maybe not always as loving to yourself in the songs. I don't know, or in your life. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a thoughtful thing to say, and thank you. Means a lot. And I've never thought about that, the notion of someone listening to my music and falling in love with the person that I'm in love with. That's such a powerful, interesting new perspective. I don't know. I think maybe it's just a reflection of like getting a bit older and realizing how complex human connection is. I mean, it's just we grow up thinking that relationships, at least I grew up thinking that relationships started and ended or succeeded or failed for these very one-dimensional reasons, you know, whether that was Hollywood that taught me that, or friends, or my parents. But the idea that someone has like a crazy ex, you know, or like that this relationship failed because this person something, you know, and then just getting older and then being in more relationships and starting to really understand how rarely things are actually that simple. Like, we're not that lucky most of the time that we can take a look at why a connection works or doesn't work and have some beautiful one line explanation for it, you know, and then in doing that, realizing that it's a real active practice to hold yourself and hold another person through all of the trials and tribulations of trying to figure that out. Like, it's really hard work and it takes a tremendous amount of mutual trust, you know, to get close with someone and get deep with someone and to hurt someone. I mean, to let someone go takes a tremendous amount of trust and a tremendous amount of care. And yeah, I guess I'm just agnostic about all of it. I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
Like, in the same way that you don't know, we don't really know what we're doing, right? We're just trying to make sense of it and do the right thing. And I think, once again, art and having the ability to write is such a beautiful mechanism for self-discovery. And also it's such a beautiful mechanism for acceptance of complexity,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
This is hard. It's for me, it's been one of the hardest psychological, spiritual, emotional experiences in my life, has been holding conflicting truths to be true. I mean, I think we all struggle with it, but it's been the thing that has been like the number one spiritual nemesis for me recently. It's just the fact that things are so rarely black and white, and so much of seeing nuance is being comfortable with sitting in a gray area, and it can be maddening, right? Like,
Oh, definitely. I think I'm weirdly at peace with that sometimes. Maybe it's just how I'm wired.
you seem wired that way.
I have other problems, but I'm weirdly at peace with being like, understanding that things could go to shit in some way with someone, but also understanding that they couldn't. I'm having a hard time articulating what I mean, but being at peace with exploring both options in my head. Because some people get really upset by the idea of being like, well, this thing could happen down the line when they're in this kind of honeymoon period in whatever relationship, platonic or not. And I'm really I definitely explore. I probe into the region of like, oh, what's the worst thing that could happen? And being like, okay, good to know. And I hold that with me in the present moment. And that's probably anxiety as well. I have no idea, but
no, I think that's brilliant. I mean, is that something that you feel like you had to learn, or do you feel like that was a part of your upbringing or your programming, or?
I have no idea. Sometimes I think I know myself. I don't. I think I'm really stoic. Yeah. Like, I think that I'm so stoic. In my head, I'm like the most stoic person.
I perceive you as a stoic person.
Because I feel like no one else does.
Really? Because I perceive you as the chillest person. Like the most... No, I find your presence so calming and comforting, because you seem so... You have always seemed so okay with yourself and with the nature of the world, and
that's so funny.
You and
Nick. Yeah. I remember when you were like, "Yeah, Nick." Did you say I reminded him of his therapist or something? I was like, I thought that was so funny. I can't remember.
No, because it's.
I was like,
you don't really have therapist vibes, because I think you're so off the cuff about your.
God.
I don't know. You're just you. I think that's a really brilliant thing, though. I mean, it's something that my therapist, not to say that you're a therapist, so yeah, my therapist has pushed me to do. You know, it's like when the worst case scenario appears, right? When you're down a bit of a rabbit hole of like, this thing could happen, like responding to that with another version of a potential future, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just as likely, right? Like if you say, okay, this person didn't text me back, they probably hate me, right? And like in that moment being like, well, it's also very likely that they don't hate me and that they're just busy.
Yeah.
And like really actively trying to respond to negative narrativizing with a bit of a positive potential. I think it's important. I think it's a good muscle to work, you know?
I think I also am kind of like, I'm in this thing where I'm like, I really love in some relationships in my life, work ones. I'm like, I'm really in it with this person now. And I love them. But down the line, if something goes wrong, can I be okay with that? Mm-hmm. I think I test that in the height of the honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't always enjoy doing that, but I think that's something I hold that together, and I hold I don't know. It's dumb.
I think that's really wise. You know, I think it's a version of non-attachment, you know? It's the way that you're talking about it doesn't sound like, catastrophic fantasizing. It really does feel beautiful, because I think, in a working relationship, in a romantic relationship, or in a friendship, I don't know, we have to, there has to be some level of faith, right? That my universe is not going to come crumbling down around me if this person disappears.
Yeah.
It's hard, but I think that is an inherently good practice, because I think it allows you to love people in a bit more of an open-handed way too. You know?
Yeah, because it's not everything. I mean, there's people in my life, it's like everything, and that's terrifying.
Of course. But yeah.
My sister is also an artist, and as you know, and she really has to go on that adventure to get good art. And for me as a sibling, I find that very, very stressful. Do you feel like you're like that sometimes, where you have to go there? And it's not like you have this idea of getting good art in your brain, but you have to live to this really extreme level to write these amazing songs. I don't know.
Completely. I mean, it's something I've thought about so much.
I feel that in your work. I feel that in your work.
For a long time, yeah. I think that I practiced quite a bit of self-destructive behavior for years. I think with the subconscious thought or belief that would be something that would be good for my art. I mean, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like, am I acting this way because I'm a self-destructive person at heart and that makes me somehow create a certain type of art? Or is it that I want to create a certain type of art and somewhere deep in my wiring, I think that the type of person that creates a certain type of art needs to be self-destructive, and that was something that in my early 20s was something that was really tortured me, like having a lot of trouble in retrospect, as much trouble as any normal person, but like trouble just like doing what I knew to be the right thing in a lot of situations with myself more than anyone, just like that feeling when you're like, I'm gonna do this and I know it's gonna make me feel terrible, but I'm still gonna do it. Like just having that feeling a bit,
Yeah.
and I outgrew that, and which was a very relieving thing to me. And but there was a period of time, I outgrew that. I feel like in retrospect, I really started to outgrow that when the pandemic started and I got sober and I was in a very dedicated relationship, and a lot was really like stabilizing and becoming less chaotic. And amidst all of that joy and peace, there was like a real fear that it would turn the wellspring off.
Hmm.
And it didn't. Like, of course it didn't. It forced me to just go a little deeper. And I really now feel like I'm in a place where I don't seek chaos like at all. I'm so here to try and take care of myself and take care of people and have things be simple, which is a relief, it's a relief to not
Yeah.
feel like you need to chase it. And no, but in a lot of ways it did force me to relearn how to be an artist, and
Yeah.
even getting medicated. Like I started taking Lexapro, and that was another. I was very trepidatious about this idea of changing my brain chemistry, even if it was one that was going to make my experience of life simpler. This notion that I would be fogging this lens in some way. But I do genuinely believe that a happy artist is a good artist. I really believe that.
Yeah. I do too.
Really believe that. I think that once again, maybe it's just harder to access that power, but it's always there. I mean, so much of our work is
It's a muscle.
how do we tap into that? Yeah, how do we tap into that? That great hive mind or whatever you want to call it. How do we tap into that? It's like it's always there, right? It's always
Yeah.
the song is always there, the painting is always there. It's always the potential is always there. It's just about being open and being able to access it.
I saw the chaos. I remember we were in Ohio. I was opening for you. I think we were in Columbus and we go upstairs and you're like, just gonna open my suitcase, get a show outfit. You're organizing your merch, you're like getting your sound check done, you're very businesslike, and you just open the suitcase and it's just like overflowing, like tangled, rumpled clothes, like everything you have. But then you lean over and you become like a creature, and you're like going through it and be like, "This will be, yeah." You're like, "This will be my show outfit." And then at the end of the show, it just kind of just gets closed
Oh
with
yeah.
no other,
Oh my
no
God.
other
I
thought.
remember that too. But
That's the
what did you
chaos that
call
you
it though?
hold.
You were like full gorilla mode or something. You had some great
I don't know. I just felt you
term
look
for
like
it.
a bear or like a werewolf or something when you got into that
Yeah.
suitcase. It was like full animal, and I was like, "Oh, okay. I see
Yeah.
that.
I
I
mean,
see that Holden holds the chaos close."
yeah, when it manifests in funny ways like that, to your point, it's like,
And
I
it's
mean,
like,
it was funny too because that time, like, I'm so happy that we were together for that time because that was my first experience touring, and you were a good friend to have through all of that. And I mean, that touring in particular, like, yeah, it has just, I've struggled to to stay sane on tour, as so many people do. I mean, and I'm seeing more people having conversations about this, just like touring and mental health, and it was definitely something that took me years to figure out. I mean, the suitcase is like a microcosm of a much bigger problem, right? But it's just like, how do you regulate when everything is moving around you, and you're having these massive spikes of adrenaline, and then you're not sleeping and you're eating at strange hours, and
Yeah.
I mean, how do you tether yourself when everything that normally tethers you disappears? And takes some time.
Do you write on tour? Did you write on this last tour any new stuff, or can you not tap into that headspace?
I wasn't ready on this last tour. Like, I had just finished my album, and I think I was honestly just feeling really present for the first time in a really beautiful way. It was a first tour that I really enjoyed and really felt proud of in a holistic sense.
Yeah.
So I was not making art because I was really hyper present, which is a good reason to not make art.
Yeah, no,
I felt
that's
very,
cool.
very tapped in and very emotional, but always sort of finding bits and pieces, right? Like I, like a bit of what we did that time that you came over to the studio, just finding lines and splatter painting a bit and all that stuff, the research part of it.
I feel like you don't have a writing ritual per se.
I'd like to. I mean, I did for years. I was such a good student about it for years. I used to write a song I would try to write 2 songs every week, journal a lot. And it's just, once again, like touring and COVID just really threw everything out the window, and in an ultimately really positive way. But it, I don't know. I'm like, I'm relearning how to write in a really big way.
Though. That's cool for the new album to just, be like, oh, I have these building blocks, and what am I going to make now? It's cool.
It is exciting. Yeah, it's daunting. And I guess, that's sort of the point as an artist, to constantly remind yourself that you know nothing and try to learn something. But and then some of it's been co-writing. I don't know how much co-writing you do. I guess we've both sort of come to it recently, but it's just a very different artistic practice, right? Like being in a room with someone, and at least for me, co-writing for myself, co-writing for Delwater Gap, like building that voice with another person has just been such a different experience.
You seem troubled by it.
Yeah, I am. I don't know. I think it's more so that it's just I think there's a bit of it's like anything else, right? Like when it's good, it's good, but it's really hard to find good. I have found, like, I've just done so many writing sessions, and it's sort of like I don't like date, but I've heard that it's my friends that are dating. I think I've heard of sort of a similar narrative that's like, you go on a date with a stranger, and like, in the first 15 seconds whether you're going to click or not. Like, you just know. And then just what you do when that click doesn't happen, and then sort of the dance of trying to salvage a amount of time together.
My God.
And maybe like the self-critical voice that could come out in that. I mean, I've felt that in co-writing where, I'll do like 20 sessions in a row and just none of them are right, and I start sort of getting in my head about, like, what if I'm just not a good writer, and then one of them does work. And you're like, oh, this is just an incredibly delicate and sacred thing. And like, I knew that. I just need to be reminded that, yeah, it has to be right. Writing with someone is such an immense, it's just such a vulnerable position to be in. And it isn't for everyone. I think a lot of people, especially in LA, it's just like, there's a different part of the industry, which is just crafting songs. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's in some ways a different industry. And I think part of learning how to co-write in my way is having some self-acceptance about what co-writing actually means for me.
Yeah.
Right? Which is not always about like finishing a song in 3 hours. It's really about, what are we going to discover here? and can we discover something together?
Yeah. What do you think is the most unshakable part of your song? Like when you're collaborating with someone, where do you put your foot down and you're like, no?
It's always lyrics. I think that lyrical taste is such a particular and delicate mechanism. Taste is everything to me. Like, no matter how good a producer, a mixer, or a writer is, it's just like, do you have a shared notion of what's good? And I think with lyrics, it's immediately really apparent, and I'm sure you felt versions of this where there's these moments when I feel like I'm all of a sudden singing someone else's words.
And that's gross. That's a crazy
It's
feeling.
gross. And it's subtle. It can be literally the difference between two very similar words that just have a different mouthfeel or whatever, but it's disturbing to me. So I'm trying to get better at speaking up. I'm pretty delicate with people and not very good at saying I don't like something that they did. But
I know, you're so nice. Sometimes I'm like, Holden, you gotta get assholey. Like, not really, because I love you, because you are so kind. But sometimes I'm like, damn.
I hear you though. I mean, I was just talking to a friend last night about it. She was reflecting on that, just going through a record and putting it out and feeling like she fell short in trying to be a people pleaser, which I don't know that I'm a people pleaser, but
No, you're not. You're not.
There's certain aspects, in creative situations where I feel the need to take care of people, which I don't think is a bad need, but I think that what you're saying and something that I'm trying to practice is understanding that if someone's working with me to work on my record, like, it is about me, and that doesn't make me a narcissist, right? Like, it's just, that's what we're doing. Like, we're making a Delwater Gap record, and it's okay to just let that be exactly what it's supposed to be,
Yeah, no guilt. But that's really hard. Guilt. That's a really hard thing to practice.
I mean, how are you with that? Like, I don't know how much you've co-written for your own project, because I think it's a bit easier when it's not your music, but how do you feel like you are with regard to telling collaborators that you don't like something?
I don't know. I haven't done a collaboration with somebody in so long that I haven't had that very intense connection with, where we were totally okay with saying no to each other. Like, I've kind of been, that's been my new thing of this last year. I've been cultivating relationships where I co-write with people either for themselves or potentially for myself, but where we're totally okay. We're on the level together. I really like writing with other artists that haven't written with a lot of other people because of that, because it's kind of like this thing we both have to do. Like, we have to enter this relationship with this kind of emotional contract to be really fucking honest and uncompromising. Yeah. And being uncompromising about what our wants are, because we are both fully developed artists. So I find that has been really fulfilling in my life. I haven't done other kinds of co-writes recently, but I've definitely had a hard time saying no. And I've also definitely met people where it was completely wonderful and they were totally cool, or they contributed something cool early on when I was doing lots of different sessions. But I'm just sort of in this mode now where I'm like max intensity with whoever I write with. I want that.
Right.
Especially if it's for myself, and also if it's for their artist project, because I want to just I want to put some blood on the paper for them,
Totally. I mean, it's so cool that you think about it that way, and I love, that emotional contract, or however you put it.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, because I think we're both people that were in bands or started out in bands, and it's an interesting world to come from, right? This artistic democracy, and I have to forget sometimes I'm not in a band. But I guess working with a producer in some sense, if you're doing a whole album with someone, in a sense, you are in a band together. And for that period of time, the idea of we're going to keep working on this until we both love it is inspiring to me,
Sometimes there's those moments where it's like you're walking on a lake and you're not sure if it's fully hard enough to support you, the ice on a frozen lake. If it's hard enough to support you yet, you take a step, you say something that's kind of bold, and you're like, I might just fall into the icy water and really fuck this up. But it's nice to create a space though where there's that chance There's that
yeah.
real chance, and that person will tell you if you've like punched through the ice. And I don't even mean that in the typical way. Like, I want to actually be standing on the ice. Like, I want to be supported with every artistic decision with them, and them to be like, yes, I'll meet you there. Or if you just like fall in and are really uncomfortable for a second. But
well, I mean, and that's a real, yeah. I mean, that specific feeling is a very real fear of mine. Saying a wrong lyric into the air.
Yeah, letting that.
It's very vulnerable.
It's very vulnerable. So to wrap things up, you're talking about kind of trying to reconfigure maybe the way you write. Like, so tell me what's next. Like, tell me if there's any way you could tell me how you're going to put that into practice, or are you going to do a concept album, or is it simpler than that?
Yeah, I really, to put it very simply, I really want to reconnect with writing alone, at least as the beginning stages of writing, like getting my foot in the door a bit on a few songs that feel like they have an identity before I involve someone else. And I'm starting a new album, and on a practical level, I really want to make an album start to finish with one partner, with one producer. So I'm going to pretty actively try to do that, just because I've never had that experience. And I've always done things mixtape style a bit, a little bit here, a little bit there. And
also, that's a financial thing sometimes, I think.
Oh, completely.
Yeah,
completely.
For
I mean,
me
I've never had the ability in the past to just actually hole up with someone and make an album. And a lot of it's been, just doing as much as I can alone. And then, having someone come in at the finish line. And my last album was not that. I worked a lot with this guy Sammy and this guy Ethan, and we made all of it together for the most part. But there was something a bit splintered about the way that we worked, and it was so much of it had to do with just my life and touring and having to make the album in 1 or 2 week spurts every 6 weeks. But it seems like I may actually have the opportunity to work consecutively for a couple months on music, and I'm terrified by that idea. Like, the notion of having space and time is sort of daunting, but I have a lot to say right now, which is like lucky. There's a lot that I need to. There's a lot of blood to put on the paper, to use your term. Like, I'm terrified and excited to start tapping into that again. And honestly, just I have a real urge to just read more again. I have gained so much from the authors that I've spent time with.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I've honored as much in the last couple of years. Once again, as I've been touring, I have found it incredibly hard to read. Just, giving into that tour malaise brain fog a bit, and just
it's hard.
Preferring to stare out the window for 3 hours rather than reading. And it's I feel like you were reading on tour. Did you? I feel like you were reading a bit.
Yeah, fuck you. You're gonna come humiliate me at the last part. Yes, I was reading like horse mystery novel thrillers.
Yes.
Nothing.
See, but like that's but like that's actually something that I want to practice more, is just reading books that I'm going to enjoy, because I think I've been a bit of a snob about it, and I need to read some great literary masterpiece, and I'm sort of like choking it down, It's like, it's like, but like no, I think it's really important to read something that you like reading. So
yeah, you gotta read. Biggest part of writing. Who's your guy? Who's your person? Who's your writer?
I mean, my first guy, who I have not sat with much recently, but Kurt Vonnegut was the first author I got into when I was a kid. He was the first time I found an author, and he had a very cohesive world and a cohesive voice. And I read like 5 or 6 of his books in a row, and really noticed the effect that had in that moment on my writing, like feeling the lens of my writing start to shift because I was spending so much time with his work. I had a similar experience with Murakami. I got into him in probably 2017, 18, and similarly read most of his books back to back, and
I can see that.
It just really, at the time and probably to this day, really like just affected my my voice. But I don't know. Right now, I'm reading some Eve Babbitt's. Like I have been really on an active pursuit to fall in love with Los Angeles, and I met a friend at a party who gave me this book, and so I'm trying to take some time with LA literature, read some Didion,
Cool.
maybe some Bukowski. A lot of his stuff is very LA centric, even though he's kind of a vile human being. He wrote some interesting LA vignettes. I mean, Jim Harrison, we've talked about Jim Harrison. I am not someone who spends a lot of time reading poetry, but his work has meant a lot to me over the years.
Yeah.
I have loved reading the work that he made towards the end of his life. There's something about his acceptance with decay. He's obviously brilliant about, he writes a lot about nature and about being in Montana and experiencing nature. And he does a really good job of paralleling like the decay within his own body and his own mind with the decay that he sees in the world, and taking comfort in that, in the natural world, rather. This notion of, I'm getting older and my brain's getting foggier and my knees hurt and I can't walk the way I used to, but there's also like an elk corpse rotting over there, and that is also decay, and I am no different than that, and this is just the circle of life and death. And I have a really old grandma. My grandma's 99, and she is, for her age, in incredible health, but she similarly like I have learned to go comfortable with her impending death and her impending decay, just being the age that she is, because of her comfort with it and her open-handedness about her mortality. And so, in a lot of ways, she has been the center of my life. And so I think in particular recently, as she has gotten noticeably older, specifically Jim Harrison's work has meant a lot to me, and it has given, I've taken comfort in his comfort.
That's how they help us. You got to now read some Kate Braverman and Ross McDonald. Those are some good LA authors. Well, thank you so much, Holden.
Thank you, Alaska.